My son demanded I change my will to leave everything to him, but I had a different plan. My name is Dorothy Williams, though everyone calls me Dot, and at 63 years old, I thought I had seen every form of family manipulation possible. I was wrong. The morning that changed my life forever started like any other Tuesday in my spacious colonial home in Westchester County, New York. I was sipping my coffee, watching the autumn leaves dance outside my kitchen window, when my son Michael walked through my front door without knocking. A habit that had always irritated me, but I learned to accept over the years. "Mom, we need to talk," he announced, his voice carrying that familiar tone of entitlement that had grown more pronounced since his father's death 3 years ago. Michael, at 38, had inherited his father's imposing frame and piercing blue eyes, but somehow managed to use both as weapons rather than assets. I set down my ceramic mug, the one with faded roses that my late husband Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary, and turned to face my eldest child. "Good morning to you too, Michael. Coffee? This isn't a social visit." He pulled out a chair at my dining table, the same mahogany table where we'd shared countless family meals, where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd celebrated his achievements and comforted him through his failures. Now it felt like a boardroom where I was about to be ambushed. "I've been thinking about your will, Mom." His fingers drummed against the polished wood surface. "Dad's been gone 3 years now, and you're not getting any younger. We need to discuss your estate planning." The audacity of his statement hit me like a physical blow. Here was my son, whom I'd raised, sacrificed for, supported through his failed business ventures and messy divorce, talking about my death as if it were an inconvenient scheduling conflict. "My will is perfectly adequate, Michael. Your father and I worked with an excellent attorney. That's exactly the problem." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "The current will split everything between me and Sarah equally. That made sense when we were kids, but things have changed. Sarah moved to California, barely calls, and frankly, she doesn't need the money with her tech job." I felt my chest tighten. Sarah, my younger child by 6 years, had indeed moved to San Francisco for work, but she called me twice a week and visited every holiday. Michael, on the other hand, lived 20 minutes away and only showed up when he needed something. "I'm the one who's here, Mom. I'm the one who checks on you, who handles your maintenance issues, who's available in emergencies." Each word was carefully calculated, designed to build his case while rewriting our family history. It only makes sense that I should inherit the house, the investments, everything. I'm the responsible one. The responsible one. The phrase would have been laughable if it weren't so insulting. Michael had borrowed money from his father and me no fewer than 7 times in the past decade, each time promising to pay it back, each time finding new excuses why he couldn't. The maintenance issues he handled usually involved him calling contractors and sending me the bills. "Michael, I'm not comfortable discussing this right now." I stood, hoping to signal that this conversation was over, but he remained seated, his presence filling my kitchen like a storm cloud. "Mom, I'm not asking. I'm telling you what needs to happen." His voice hardened, revealing the cruel streak that had worried me since his teenage years. "You're going to call Attorney Morrison and change the will. Sarah gets a small token amount, maybe $50,000, and I get everything else. The house, the investment accounts, Dad's life insurance payout, all of it." I stared at my son, this man I'd brought into the world, nursed through childhood illnesses, cheered at Little League games, and suddenly felt like I was looking at a stranger. "And if I refuse?" Michael's smile was cold, calculating. "Then maybe I won't be so available for those emergencies you keep having. Maybe I won't be around to help you maintain this big house. Maybe Sarah will have to fly back from California to deal with your problems. The threat hung in the air between us like poison gas. This was my son, my flesh and blood, using my age and perceived vulnerability as leverage to steal his sister's inheritance. Where you're watching this unfold, I hope you'll like and subscribe because this story is just beginning. And trust me, it gets much worse before it gets better. I need time to think about this, I said quietly, though my mind was already racing with plans he couldn't possibly imagine. You have 1 week, Mom, 1 week to make the right decision. He stood, kissed my cheek with the same lips that had just threatened to abandon me, and walked out of my house, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that I had raised a monster. The week following Michael's ultimatum felt like living in a different reality. Every interaction with my family suddenly took on new meaning. Every conversation filtered through the lens of his shocking demands. I began to see patterns I'd somehow missed, or perhaps willfully ignored for years. 3 days after our confrontation, Michael's ex-wife Jennifer called me. We'd maintained a friendship after their divorce, bonded by our shared experience of loving and losing the man Michael had become. Over coffee at a small cafe in downtown Scarsdale, Jennifer's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her mug. Dot, I need to tell you something about Michael, something I should have said years ago. Her voice was barely above a whisper. During our marriage, he used to talk about your money constantly. He'd calculate how much the house was worth, estimate your investment portfolio, even research the average life expectancy for women your age. My blood ran cold. What are you saying, Jennifer? He has this whole plan mapped out. He's been planning for your death for years, Dot. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. He even said once that he hoped you wouldn't live too long because he needed the money while he was still young enough to enjoy it. The coffee shop around us buzzed with normal conversation. People discussing work, weekend plans, their children's accomplishments. Meanwhile, I sat frozen, learning that my own son had been counting down the days until my death like a morbid advent calendar. There's more, Jennifer continued. Remember when he convinced you to add his name to your checking account for emergencies? He's been skimming money, Dot, small amounts, but regularly. He figured you wouldn't notice because you've always been trusting with family finances. My mind reeled back to the past year. There had been some discrepancies in my bank statements, but Michael had always had explanations. A grocery run he'd done for me, gas for his car when he'd driven me to doctor's appointments, small household repairs he'd paid for up front. I'd never questioned him because he was my son, because I'd trusted him implicitly. How much? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I don't know exactly, but during our marriage, he'd often come home with expensive purchases, tools, electronics, restaurant meals that he claimed were from helping you with errands. I started to suspect he was taking advantage of your generosity. On that evening, I drove to the bank. Margaret Thompson, the branch manager who'd known me for 15 years, pulled up my account records with a sympathetic expression. The numbers told a story I'd been too naive to read. Over the past 18 months, Michael had withdrawn nearly $12,000 from my account, always in amounts small enough to avoid triggering alerts, always with explanations that had seemed reasonable at the time. Mrs. Williams, Margaret said gently, I probably should have flagged this pattern earlier. The withdrawals were frequent enough to be concerning, but since your son was an authorized user, it's not your fault, Margaret. I trusted him. The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but Michael's financial manipulation was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to how he spoke about Sarah. Every conversation somehow included subtle digs at my daughter. She was too busy with her career to care about family. She was selfish for moving across the country. She only called out of obligation. I realized he'd been systematically poisoning my relationship with Sarah for years, planting seeds of doubt about her motives while positioning himself as the devoted, sacrificial son. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and I'd been his unwitting student. The most devastating revelation came when I found a text message thread on an old phone of mine that Michael had used temporarily when his was being repaired. He'd forgotten to delete his messages, and there, in black and white, were conversations with his current girlfriend, a woman named Brandy whom I'd never met. "The old lady is finally coming around," he'd written just 2 days ago. "Should have the will changed by next week. Then it's just a waiting game." "What if she changes her mind?" Brandy had replied. "She won't. I've got her convinced that Sarah doesn't care about her. Plus, she's getting more forgetful lately. Might be able to claim she wasn't mentally competent if she tries to change it back later. My son, the child I'd carried for 9 months, birthed in pain, raised with love, was planning to gaslight me into questioning my own mental competency. He was willing to destroy my relationship with Sarah to secure his inheritance, and he was already planning his next moves like a chess master sacrificing pawns. That night, I called Sarah in San Francisco. Through tears, I told her everything. Michael's demands, Jennifer's revelations, the bank statements, the text messages. My daughter's voice broke as she listened, and I could hear her own tears through the phone. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have seen this, should have protected you." She was crying now, and I could picture her in her small apartment overlooking the bay, 3,000 miles away, but somehow closer to me than the son who lived 20 minutes down the road. "How long has he been saying things about me?" she asked. "Years, sweetheart. I'm so ashamed that I believed him." "Mom, you're not the one who should be ashamed. He's the one who's been lying and manipulating everyone." Sarah's voice grew stronger, more determined. "We're going to stop him. We're going to make sure he can't hurt you anymore." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the fierce protectiveness of a mother. But this time, I was protecting myself and my daughter from my own son. Michael had made one crucial mistake in his calculations. He'd assumed I was weak, that I was lonely, that I was vulnerable. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. The turning point came on a gray Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Michael's ultimatum. I was supposed to call Attorney Morrison that day to change my will, but instead I found myself doing something I'd never done before. I was investigating my own son. I started with the obvious, his social media accounts. Despite being 38 years old, Michael posted constantly on Facebook and Instagram, documenting his life with the narcissistic fervor of someone half his age. What I discovered there made my stomach turn. Photos from expensive restaurants tagged with dates that coincided with my emergency fund withdrawals. Pictures of him at a luxury spa in the Hamptons, captioned, "Treating myself after a stressful week helping family." Posted the same day he told me he was too busy to help me move furniture because he was drowning in work responsibilities. But it was the comments that truly revealed his character. Under a photo of himself at a high-end steakhouse, his friend Danny had written, "How do you afford this lifestyle without a steady job?" Michael's response was chilling. "Family benefits. Sometimes being a good son pays off in unexpected ways." I screenshotted everything, my hands shaking as I documented the evidence of his exploitation. But I was just getting started. I drove to Westchester Community College, where Michael claimed to be taking business courses to better himself. The registrar, a kind woman named Mrs. Chen, looked genuinely confused when I asked about my son's enrollment. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Williams, but we have no record of a Michael Williams enrolled in any of our programs. Are you sure you have the right college?" Every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months, Michael had left his apartment, ostensibly to attend classes. I'd been so proud of him for taking initiative, for trying to improve his prospects. Now I realized those days had been elaborate lies, probably spent at bars or with his girlfriend while he crafted stories about his educational journey. My next stop was the employment office, where Michael claimed to be working part-time as a consultant. The receptionist, a young man with kind eyes, checked their system twice before shaking his head. "We've never had a Michael Williams on our payroll, ma'am." I'm sorry. Every story, every excuse, every reason he'd given for needing money had been fabricated. My son wasn't just manipulative. He was a pathological liar who'd built an entire fictional life to justify his parasitic existence. But the most devastating discovery came when I decided to drive past his apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a complex I'd helped him afford. What I saw in the parking lot made my world tilt on its axis. 3 expensive cars sat in visitor spaces: a BMW, a Mercedes, and a Lexus. I recognized the license plate on the BMW. It belonged to my neighbor's son, Tommy, who'd always been trouble. The Mercedes belonged to a man I didn't recognize, but the Lexus belonged to my brother-in-law, Richard. Richard, my late husband's brother, who'd always been polite but distant at family gatherings. Richard, who'd expressed concern about my mental state after Robert's death. Richard, who'd suggested more than once that I might need help managing my affairs. I sat in my car, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about Michael's greed, this was a conspiracy. My son had been working with others, possibly for years, to position me as an incompetent elderly woman who needed their protection and guidance. I waited. 2 hours later, the 3 men emerged from Michael's apartment, and I could see them talking animatedly. Michael was gesturing with his hands, the way he always did when he was excited about something. Richard was nodding, his expression serious. Tommy was laughing, his body language suggesting he was enjoying whatever game they were playing. That evening, I called my old friend Patricia, who'd worked as a private investigator before retiring. Her voice was grim as I explained what I'd discovered. "Dot, honey, this sounds like they're planning something bigger than just changing your will. If Richard is involved, and if they're talking about your mental competency, they might be planning to have you declared incompetent. Once that happens, they could take control of everything: your house, your finances, your medical decisions." The room spun around me. "But I'm perfectly competent, Patricia. I manage my own affairs, I drive, It doesn't matter if you're actually incompetent, sweetheart. It matters if they can convince a judge that you are. And if they've been documenting evidence of your declining mental state, if they have witnesses who'll testify that you've been acting confused or paranoid." I thought about all the times Michael had corrected me in front of others, all the times he'd claimed I'd forgotten conversations we'd never had, all the ways he'd positioned himself as my caretaker to friends and neighbors. He'd been building a case against me for years, and I'd been too trusting to see it. What do I do, Patricia? You fight back, honey. But you have to be smart about it. They think they're dealing with a confused old woman, so let them keep thinking that. Meanwhile, you gather evidence, you document everything, and you prepare for war. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by the remnants of my old life. Photos of family gatherings where Michael smiled and hugged me, birthday cards where he'd written, "Love you, Mom." Memories of the son I thought I'd raised. But now I saw everything differently. Now I understood that I'd been living with an enemy who wore my child's face. I opened my laptop and began typing. First, I documented every lie, every manipulation, every theft. Then I started researching elder abuse laws, inheritance fraud, and financial exploitation. I learned about conservatorships and how they could be abused, about the legal protections available to seniors, about the steps I could take to protect myself. By sunrise, I had a plan. Michael wanted to play games with my will, my competency, and my future. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I'd spent 63 years learning, growing, and surviving. I'd buried a husband, raised 2 children, and built a life of quiet dignity. But quiet time was over. My son had awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long. The fierce determination of a woman who refused to be anyone's victim. He thought he was manipulating a weak, lonely widow. He was about to meet Dorothy Williams, and she was nobody's fool. The transformation began with a haircut and with I know that sounds ridiculous, but sometimes the most powerful changes start with the smallest acts of rebellion. I'd been wearing my silver hair in the same conservative style for 15 years, but that Friday morning, I walked into Salon Magnifique in White Plains and asked for something completely different. I want to look like a woman who knows her own worth, I told Christina, the stylist who'd been cutting hair for 30 years and had the wisdom that comes with listening to women's stories all day long. 2 hours later, I walked out with a chic bob that took 10 years off my appearance and added 10 years to my confidence. The woman in the mirror looked ready for battle, and that's exactly what I was. My first ally came from an unexpected source. Margaret Thompson from the bank called me that afternoon with information that made my blood boil and my resolve strengthen simultaneously. Mrs. Williams, I've been reviewing your account more carefully after our conversation, and I found something troubling. Your son has been making transfers to several other accounts, including one joint account he shares with someone named Brandy Morrison. He's also been accessing your safe deposit box. My safe deposit box. The one that contained my important documents, my jewelry, and most importantly, copies of my original will and Robert's life insurance policies. Michael had a key because I'd trusted him to handle my affairs if something happened to me. Now I realized he'd been using that access to plan his theft. Margaret, I need you to freeze all access to my accounts except for my personal use. Remove Michael immediately as an authorized user. And I want to know everything that's been in and out of that safe deposit box. Of course, Mrs. Williams, I should also mention that we have security cameras in the safe deposit box area. If you'd like to review the footage of your son's visits, 20 minutes later, I was watching video of Michael rifling through my personal belongings like a burglar casing a house. The footage showed him photographing documents with his phone, examining my jewelry, and even pocketing some of my mother's antique rings I'd planned to leave to Sarah. But I was no longer just a victim gathering evidence. I was a strategist building a case. My next call was to Sarah in San Francisco. Sweetheart, I need you to take some vacation time and come home. We have work to do. Mom, I can fly out tonight if you need me to. Not tonight. I need you to arrive next Friday, and I need you to be very careful about what you tell people. As far as anyone knows, you're coming for a normal visit. But what we're really doing is preparing for the fight of our lives. While I waited for Sarah's arrival, I began reaching out to other potential allies. Jennifer, Michael's ex-wife, agreed to meet me again, and this time she brought documentation of her own. Bank statements showing that Michael had been hiding money during their divorce proceedings, text messages where he'd bragged about his inheritance prospects, and recordings of conversations where he discussed his plans for my estate. I kept all of this because I knew someday I might need it, Jennifer explained. Not to hurt Michael, but to protect myself and my daughter. He owes me child support, and I suspected he was hiding assets. But the most valuable ally emerged from my own neighborhood. Dorothy Martinez, a recently retired attorney who lived 3 houses down from me, had been watching my situation with growing concern. I hope you don't mind me saying this, Dot, but I've been worried about you. I've seen how your son talks to you, how he treats you, And as someone who specialized in elder law, I've been seeing red flags for months. Dorothy, we laughed about sharing the same name, had been observing Michael's behavior at neighborhood gatherings. She'd noticed how he interrupted me, how he answered questions directed at me, how he positioned himself as my caretaker to others. He's been systematically undermining your autonomy, Dot. It's a classic pattern. First, they make you seem incompetent to others. Then they use that perception to justify taking control of your life. I've seen it dozens of times in my practice. What would you have done if I hadn't figured it out? I was preparing to approach you anyway. I was just trying to figure out how to do it without seeming like I was interfering. She leaned forward, her expression serious. But I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I've been documenting his behavior too, and I have several neighbors who've noticed the same patterns. By the time Sarah arrived the following Friday, I had assembled what I privately called my army of truth. We had evidence of financial theft, lies about employment and education, conspiracy with other family members, and most importantly, a clear pattern of manipulation designed to undermine my competency and steal my estate. Sarah cried when she saw the evidence, but they were tears of anger, not sadness. Mom, this is criminal. This isn't just family drama. This is fraud, theft, and conspiracy. I know, sweetheart, and we're going to stop it. That weekend, we set up a war room in my dining room. Sarah, with her tech background, helped me organize digital evidence. Dorothy Martinez reviewed everything from a legal perspective. Jennifer continued providing inside information about Michael's plans. Even Margaret from the bank had agreed to testify if necessary about the financial irregularities. But I saved the most important conversation for last. Sunday evening, I called my old friend Patricia, the retired private investigator. Patricia, I need you to come out of retirement for one last case. I'll pay your full rate, and I need you to dig into Michael's life, his finances, and his connections. I need to know everything he's been hiding. Honey, I've been waiting for this call. I already started some preliminary research after our last conversation. Your son has been busier than you know, and not just with your money. What do you mean? He's been running the same scam on other elderly relatives. Your husband's Aunt Emma, who died last year. Michael was her helpful nephew too. He'd been managing her affairs for months before she passed, and her estate was significantly smaller than her family expected. The room spun around me. Aunt Emma had been 93 when she died, and she'd lived modestly but comfortably her entire life. We'd all assumed her small estate was simply the result of medical expenses and inflation. Patricia, are you saying... I'm saying your son has been running a long con, Dot. You weren't his first victim, and you wouldn't have been his last. He's been systematically targeting elderly family members, gaining their trust and stealing their assets. As I hung up the phone, I realized that this wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about stopping a predator who'd been using family relationships to victimize vulnerable elderly people. Michael wasn't just my son who'd lost his way. He was a criminal who'd been hiding behind the mask of family loyalty. The scared, confused woman who'd sat in her kitchen a week ago was gone. In her place stood someone I barely recognized. A warrior who'd spent decades building strength she hadn't known she possessed. Michael had made one fatal error in his calculations. He'd assumed that being my son gave him permanent power over me. He'd forgotten that I was the one who taught him everything he knew about determination, strategy, and fighting for what's right. Tomorrow, he would learn the difference between a teacher and a student. The trap was set for the following Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after Michael's original ultimatum. I'd called him that morning, my voice carefully modulated to sound tired and defeated. Michael, I've been thinking about what you said, about the will, about Sarah, about everything. I think you're right. I think I need to make some changes. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice as he agreed to come over that afternoon. I'm proud of you, Mom. This is the right decision for everyone. Oh, but when Michael walked into my house at 3 o'clock, he didn't find the broken, compliant woman he expected. Instead, he found me sitting at my dining room table, surrounded by my army of truth, with enough evidence to destroy his carefully constructed lies. Sarah sat at my right hand, her laptop open, ready to present our digital evidence. Dorothy Martinez was at my left, her legal pads covered with notes and relevant statutes. Jennifer sat across from me, her own folder of documents neatly organized. Margaret from the bank had joined us via video call, her serious expression filling my tablet screen. "What's all this?" Michael asked, his voice uncertain for the first time in years. "This is the conversation we should have had 2 weeks ago," I replied, my voice steady and strong. "Sit down, Michael. We have a lot to discuss." He remained standing, his body language shifting from confident to defensive. "I don't know what kind of ambush this is, but I'm not interested in playing games. Neither am I." I opened the first folder on my table. "Let's start with the $12,000 you've stolen from my checking account over the past 18 months. Michael's face went pale, but he quickly recovered. "Those weren't thefts, Mom. Those were legitimate expenses for helping you with..." "With what exactly?" Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through his lies like a blade. "With the college classes you're not taking, with the job you don't have, or maybe with the expensive dinners you've been bragging about on social media." She turned her laptop screen toward him, showing a compilation of his social media posts that directly contradicted his claims about helping me. Michael stared at the evidence, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "This is ridiculous," he finally managed. "You're twisting everything, making me look like some kind of criminal." "You are a criminal, Michael," Dorothy Martinez said, her attorney's voice cutting through the room like a judgment. "What you've been doing is called financial elder abuse, and it's a felony in New York State. The evidence we've gathered is more than sufficient for criminal charges." Jennifer leaned forward, her own evidence spread before her. "Tell them about Aunt Emma, Michael. Tell them about the other elderly relatives you've been helping over the years." The color drained completely from Michael's face. He looked around the room like a trapped animal, realizing for the first time that his victims had become his prosecutors. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're all making a huge mistake," he said, his voice rising with desperation. "Mom, these people are turning you against your own son. Can't you see that? They're manipulating you, making you paranoid." "The only one who's been manipulating me is you," I replied, my voice growing stronger with each word. "For years, you've been lying to me, stealing from me, and planning to steal from your sister. You've been positioning me as an incompetent old woman so you could take control of my life and my assets. That's not true. I've been trying to help you, to protect you." "From what? From my own daughter? From my own decisions? Or from my ability to see what you really are?" Margaret's voice came through the video call, professional and damning. "Mr. Williams, I have records of every unauthorized transaction from your mother's account. I have video footage of you accessing her safe deposit box without her knowledge. I have documentation of your lies about the purposes of your withdrawals. This is fraud, pure and simple." Michael's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. The expenses, the bills, the constant worry about money. I was just trying to secure my future, to make sure I could take care of myself and take care of Mom when she needed it. By stealing from your own mother?" Sarah's voice was filled with disgust. "By lying about education and employment? By conspiring with Uncle Richard to have Mom declared incompetent? You don't know what you're talking about." But his denial was weak, desperate. "We know about the meetings, Michael," I said quietly. "We know about the plans. We know about the other relatives you've been targeting. This isn't about securing your future. This is about your complete lack of character." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Michael's labored breathing. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, women he'd underestimated, dismissed, or tried to manipulate. Now we were united against him, and he was completely outnumbered. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "We want you to understand that your crimes have consequences," Dorothy Martinez replied. "We want you to know that elder abuse is a serious offense, and we have enough evidence to see you prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But more than that," I added, "we want you to know that you've lost the privilege of being my son. You've traded a mother's love for money you didn't earn, and that's a bargain you can never undo." Michael stared at me, perhaps finally seeing the woman I'd become instead of the victim he'd thought he was manipulating. "Mom, please, I'm sorry. I made mistakes, but I'm still your son." "No," I said firmly. "My son would never have done what you've done. My son would have honored his father's memory and protected his family. My son would have been a man of character. I don't know who you are, but you're not my son." The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Michael looked around the room one more time, seeking sympathy or support that wasn't there. Finally, he stood up, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," I replied. "Your access to my accounts is terminated. Your key to my house is being changed. Your ability to make decisions about my life or my estate is finished. You're no longer welcome in my home or in my life." As Michael walked toward the door, he turned back one last time. "You'll regret this, Mom. All of you will regret this." But I was no longer afraid of his threats. I was surrounded by people who valued truth over manipulation, justice over convenience, and dignity over money. I had my daughter, my friends, and most importantly, I had myself, the woman I'd forgotten I could be. "The only thing I regret," I called after him, "is that it took me so long to see who you really are." The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through my house. But instead of sadness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. The weight of his lies, his manipulation, and his expectations had been lifted from my shoulders. I was 63 years old, and for the first time in decades, I was truly free. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, I'm writing this final chapter from my new apartment in downtown White Plains. The colonial house in Westchester is being sold, not because I couldn't afford to keep it, but because I chose to start fresh in a space that had never been contaminated by Michael's lies. The apartment is smaller but filled with light, overlooking a park where I walk every morning. I've painted the walls in colors I love, soft blues and warm yellows that make me smile when I wake up. The furniture is new, chosen by me for me, without considering what anyone else might think or need. Sarah visits every month now, sometimes bringing her boyfriend David, who treats me with the respect and genuine affection I'd forgotten was possible from a man. They're talking about marriage, and Sarah asked if I would help plan the wedding. Not because she needs my money, but because she wants my involvement in her life. The difference is everything. The legal aftermath of Michael's crimes was swift and thorough. Patricia's investigation revealed that he'd been systematically defrauding elderly relatives for nearly a decade. Aunt Emma's estate had been looted, Uncle Richard's own mother had been victimized, and 3 other elderly cousins had been targeted. The total amount stolen was over $200,000. Michael is currently serving 18 months in minimum security prison for elder financial abuse and fraud. He'll be eligible for parole in 12 months, but the conditions of his release will include restitution payments and a permanent restraining order preventing him from contacting me or accessing any of my financial information. The most satisfying part of his downfall was how quickly his enablers abandoned him once the truth came out. Uncle Richard, faced with evidence of his own participation in the conspiracy, agreed to testify against Michael in exchange for reduced charges. Tommy, the neighbor's son, turned out to be small-time fraud himself, and he rolled over on Michael faster than a trained seal. Brandy, Michael's girlfriend, disappeared the moment she realized her meal ticket was headed to prison. She'd been spending the money he'd stolen from me, and she knew exactly where it had come from. Justice has a way of revealing people's true character, and hers was as shallow as her loyalty. But this story isn't really about Michael's punishment, it's about my transformation. The woman who was so easily manipulated 6 months ago no longer exists. In her place is someone I'm still getting to know, someone who surprises me daily with her strength and clarity. I've started volunteering with the Elder Abuse Prevention Program at the county courthouse, helping other seniors recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation. My story has become a teaching tool, showing people that manipulation can happen to anyone, but that it's never too late to fight back. Last month, I helped a 78-year-old man named Frank recognize that his grandson was stealing from him. 2 weeks ago, I sat with a woman named Grace while she confronted her daughter about forged checks. These conversations are difficult, but they're also powerful reminders that families can be sources of love or exploitation, and we have the right to choose which we'll accept. Dorothy Martinez has become one of my closest friends. We meet for coffee every Wednesday, and she's teaching me about legal protections for seniors. I'm considering going back to school myself, not because I need to prove anything to anyone, but because learning makes me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. The financial recovery has been better than expected. Most of the money Michael stole has been recovered through restitution orders and asset seizures. The house sold for more than I expected, and my investment portfolio has grown significantly now that I'm managing it myself with the help of a financial advisor I chose based on credentials rather than family connections. But the most important change is in how I see myself. For years, I defined myself through my relationships with others: Robert's wife, Michael's mother, Sarah's mom. Now I'm learning to be Dorothy Williams, a woman with her own interests, her own opinions, and her own life. I've taken up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. My first canvas was a portrait of myself as I am now, silver-haired, confident, surrounded by the people who truly love me. It hangs in my living room, a daily reminder of the journey I have taken. Sarah and I talk every day now, and our relationship has deepened beyond anything I could have imagined. She's not just my daughter anymore. She's my friend, my confidant, and my partner in building a family based on mutual respect rather than obligation. "Mom," she said during her last visit, "I'm so proud of the woman you've become. You've inspired me to be stronger in my own life, to stand up for myself, to never accept less than I deserve. That's what I want for anyone who's listening to this story. I want you to know that it's never too late to recognize manipulation, to fight back against exploitation, to choose dignity over convenience. Age doesn't make us vulnerable. Accepting other people's definitions of our worth makes us vulnerable. If you're watching this story because you recognize something familiar in your own life, please know that you have options. You have resources. You have the right to be treated with respect by your family, and you have the power to enforce that right. The Dorothy Williams who was intimidated by her son's demands no longer exists. In her place is a woman who knows her worth, who surrounds herself with people who honor that worth, and who refuses to accept anything less than the respect and love she deserves. I'm 63 years old and I'm just getting started. The best chapters of my life are still being written, and for the first time in years, I'm the one holding the pen. If you found strength in my story, please like and subscribe. Share it with anyone who might need to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself, to fight for your dignity, and to build the life you deserve. My name is Dorothy Williams, and I am nobody's victim. I am a survivor, a fighter, and a woman who finally learned that the most important person to love and protect is myself. The inheritance Michael wanted so desperately, it's going to Sarah, to charities that help elderly people, and to a trust that will ensure no one ever has the power to manipulate me again. But the most valuable inheritance I can leave is the knowledge that we all have the power to choose our own worth, to define our own lives, and to refuse to be anyone's victim. That's a legacy worth fighting for, and it's never too late to claim it.